now I would like to introduce, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Eylem?
Eylem.
Eylem Delikanli? Delikanli is a writer for the independent daily newspaper Virgun. Is that correct? Her article focused on American politics and culture. She's the co-author of Left Behind, a work of oral history focusing on the 1980 coup d'etat in Turkey and its effects on families of individuals that were targeted by the military. She focuses on the political refugees living in Europe after the 1980 coup d'etat for her upcoming project as a sequel.
Thank you.
Sure.
I apologize for being late. I would like to read a piece that I drafted for today to better use the time since it's only 10 minutes. I also wanted to start with commenting on the title actually that fascism has never left Europe, and at least not in our case in Turkey. And I have to admit that it's extremely hard for me and emotionally challenging to speak here today because yesterday we lost a boy, a 15-year-old boy named Berk Elvan, who was shot with a gas canister on June 16, 2013 during the Gezi protests. And he was on his way to buy some bread from a bakery, and that's when he was shot. And he was in a coma for 268 days. And he was 16 kilograms, almost around 30 pounds, when he died yesterday at 7 a.m. So the police attacked the hospital that he had been staying, and another protester was shot in the head during the attacks. So he's unconscious now. The family did not have time to mourn their child before the police attack. So today, actually millions are marching, were marching in every major city in Istanbul, and as well as around 30 cities worldwide for his funeral, to stand in solidarity and to demand justice. As we speak, actually, police is still firing tear gas and hunting down peaceful demonstrators on the streets in Istanbul and Ankara. Berkin is actually the 8th friend that we lost as a direct result of state terror in the last 10 months, along with Abdullah Cömert, Mehmet Ayvalıtaş, Ali İsmail Korkmaz, Ethem Sarısülük, Medeni Yıldırım, Ahmet Atakan, and Hasan Ferit Gedik, all aging between 15 to 26. The question that lays ahead is, in which context do we really define and conceptualize violence and terror that we experience and witness today? Is this merely a transitional or a governmental issue, or are we defining a more rooted and gripped structure that feeds fascism and authoritarianism here? As Bertolt Brecht once replied upon being asked what fascism is, he said, we need to speak about capitalism if we discuss fascism. So the conceptualization and relativity is not solely a reduction, but is useful insofar as it sets up the frame for social relationships. I think a brief retrospective look at the recent history can help us draw a better conclusion on what is happening in Turkey today. Our history is obviously very resourceful in terms of discrimination, injustice, extermination, and assimilation. However, a defining moment in Turkish history is the coup d'etat of 1980. When the history of republic actually consists of 5 coup d'etats, why do we focus only on the 1980 coup? This might be another question. At the end of the 70s, Turkey was in a turmoil with unsolved economic and social problems, facing strikes and partial paralysis of politics. Industrial bourgeoisie faced great challenges from largely organized political groups, associations, and unions. Along with the economic crisis, hegemonic crisis also defined the 70s. When the National Security Council, headed by Kenan Evren, declared coup d'etat, extended martial law throughout the country, and abolished the parliament and the government on September 12, 1980, not only did it end the hegemonic crisis, but also paved the way to rebuild and restructure the society in order to facilitate the economic and social integration to the neoliberal order. Around the 80s, when the crisis of capitalism was meant to be solved with neoliberal policies, it was clear as day and night that there was a bourgeoisie in hegemonic crisis against the organized working class in Turkey. As a reason for the coup, we can also talk about the Cold War politics, Marshall Plan, and the role associated to border countries like Turkey, Green Axis project to foster religious regimes against the Soviets, the ramifications of a polarized world on the domestic intellectuals, the sustained subordination of the social classes to transnational politics were being jeopardized. So this was not welcomed by the international conjuncture and its domestic allies. And also a strong emancipation politics dominated by the public sphere, especially among the university youth. Therefore, the first action of the junta was to implement economic and structural changes in the fiscal realm and labor. January 24th economic policies drafted and created by Minister of Economy, famous Turgut Özal, were not merely economic policies, but also the processor of our social and economic problems we are facing today. Most of the policies that would have been impossible to be accepted by the working class were easily initiated and implemented after the coup. Labor movement was at the height of its strength during the 70s. Therefore, the 1980 coup eliminated the bureaucratic barriers in favor of the bourgeoisie and paved the way for policies that would have been previously impossible to implement. In conclusion, the 1980 coup defines a moment in Turkish history where pretty much everybody lost against the bourgeoisie. Obviously, the revolutionists and the leftists paid the highest price. Moving forward into the 90s, we now see a country with neoliberal infrastructure and policies, coalition governments in an ongoing economic crisis. On the other hand, a strong Kurdish freedom movement led by PKK is in a fierce war with the Turkish military in the east. Major human rights violations are taking place across the country, becoming a systematic extermination policy in the east, revealing itself with forced disappearances, murders, forced migrations, tortures, house and village raids carried out by JITEM counter-guerrilla and the Turkish Revenge Brigade, as well as the military. Kurdish newspapers were raided and journalists were executed on the spot, and Newroz of 1992 was one of the bloodiest. More than hundreds of people were killed in Şırnak, Nusaybin, and Cizre when the army attacked the Kurds celebrating the Newroz. While this was happening in the East, fascism showed its face in a similar fashion in the West. We witnessed an extremely oppressive regime undermining the rights to organize and protest, attacking freedom of speech. Once again, the leftists, especially students, journalists, and intellectuals were among the ones mainly targeted in the 90s, most of them jailed and tortured in prisons. There are a list of events that should be mentioned here. Sivas massacre, a brutal murder of 33 intellectuals by a mob of radical Islamists. Among the famous intellectuals and journalists, Bahri Üçok, Musa Anter, Uğur Mumcu, Onat Kutlar, Hasan Ocak, and Metin Göktepe were targeted and killed in the 90s, and it pointed to the involvement of the deep state. And Gezi massacre is another events that took place during the 90s, and during the week of December 19 to 26, 10,000 Turkish soldiers violently occupied 48 prisons to end a 2 months of hunger strikes and death fast by hundreds of political prisoners. Now, going into 2000, politics is defined by the successive elections won by a landslide by AKP and Tayyip Erdogan. The AKP government was largely supported and encouraged by the US and the European Union for their economic success and so-called social reforms for an open society. Erdogan became a popular leader both in Turkey and in the Middle East for being economically progressive and socially conservative. What seemed to be a great achievement on the surface can be better portrayed with what actually took place during this period. Turkey ranks as the world's top press jailer by the Committee to Protect Journalists as of December 2013, and more than 100 journalists were in prison for their journalistic work. Thousands of Kurdish and Turkish intellectuals and dissenters in jail under the so-called KCK case, the famous trials of Ergenekon, Balyoz, and Oda TV, imprisoned journalists, army generals, not that I technically oppose that, but more that they were based on unfair and impartially highly questionable trials. So even the murderers and the fascists were jailed not on the grounds of their actual crimes, but on unclear judicial grounds. Hrant Dink's assassination is another litmus test for anyone in power to reveal their understanding of justice and whom they deem worthy of it. Roboski massacre took place in December 2011, killed 38 civilians by 2 Turkish F-16 jets in the border of Iraq. And With respect to the social issues, women are consistently targeted by the government's curtailing their rights to abortion and regulating everyday life, where they're confined to families and houses and forced to leave public space to men. So the list continues, and obviously I thought I had 15 minutes, but I just learned I have 10. Will not suffice to detail the authoritarianism of the current government, but these are only the recent examples of how systematically violence is utilized to crush difference and dissidence in Turkey. So the constitution drafted and voted in 1982 still serves as the constitution of the country, although changed and revised many times. After the latest referendum in 2010, it still defines the existing judicial system, higher education and election system in the country. So the neoliberal policies that destroy our cities, villages and our nature have their roots in the 1980 era and its constitution. People of Turkey witnessed a period where major destruction and curtailing of their freedom of speech and civil rights took place in the last 34 years. However, moving forward from 2002 on, oppression and open fascism showed itself also in terms of major gentrification projects destroying the cities, villages we live, transforming the historical heritage we have, and our habitats being perpetually threatened by the institutions of the governing logic. In Turkey, the politics of escalation, normalizes state violence as it criminalizes and marginalizes the opposition in an attempt to isolate it from the society. No matter who controls the power, we successively witness that the logic of the state is consistent in silencing dissent, eliminating the so-called dangers for its existence and creating national alliances for its own sake. Adorno talks about the curtain in his book, The Authoritarian Personality, and he talks about the capitalist system creating practically and automatically these curtains that prevent to see what is really happening. I think it's a great metaphor to describe Gezi resistance. I see Gezi resistance as a movement that took down that curtain, and it all began with a small protest in late May to save Gezi Park near Taksim Square in Istanbul from destruction. The brutal crackdown on the protests by the police propelled the long-lasting dissatisfaction with the government and led to massive public demonstrations which are still underway. Gezi became the name of a phenomenal civil resistance that left many of us puzzled, curious, and most of all excited since May 31st. It was a manifesto showing us that life will never be the same again, and that there's a clear break from old ways of thinking, taking sides, or doing politics. As we consistently state, this is just the beginning. Now, coming back to the original question, is fascism returning to Europe? We should maybe rephrase the question to ask how fascism is reforming itself now in Europe. This is a valid question because one of the motivations underlying the neoliberal policies is the welfare of the capital and increasing subordination of the social relations of the capitalist mechanism of action. Given this, the swift transformation from a warm-faced, tolerant governance to an overt, oppressive regime with police forces coincides very well with the general crisis of the capitalist system. Thus, fascism is changing its phase and methods of action, but the essence is still the same. It still serves for achieving with overt violence and what the sovereign capital cannot achieve with the existing legislative framework. So going back to Brecht, he's right, we should go on talking about capitalism.